Hello, bonjour, namaste, ni hao, and ohio everybody. What is going on? It is Gale right here. Welcome back to the YouTube channel once again for another Danmachi video. And today we're going to be taking a look at the differences between the game adaptation of Sword Oratoria 12, which is of course the main event and the main theme of Danmemo's 6th anniversary. And we're going to be comparing it directly to the original source material, the light novel version of Sword Oratoria 12. Now, of course, to make this video, I have reread both the light novel and the game adaptation multiple times in order to prepare myself for this video. So of course, if you guys going to enjoy this video, please be sure to leave a like down below. It would be truly appreciated. Hit that subscribe button if you want to see more Danmachi content, and of course leave a comment down below as well. Let me know what do you guys think about the game adaptation if you have read through it, and of course if you have read the light novel, you guys can let me know what do you guys think about the two. Now of course, because this video is going to contain spoilers for Sword Oratoria 12, and if you haven't read it yet and you're still waiting for maybe say part 2 and part 3 to come out, because remember, this is only part 1 of Sword Oratoria 12 that we have access to right now in the game. Make sure you guys stay away from this video. Maybe you guys can come back down the line in the future and rewatch this video. Of course, we're going to be doing a part 2 and part 3 version of this as well when we get them in game, of course, right? But if you haven't already read through Sword Oratoria 12, I would highly advise you guys, skip this video and come back in the future to rewatch this video maybe. And of course, if you have watched my videos on me live reacting to Sword Oratoria 12, or if you've read it on your own as well, or if you've read the light novel version of Sword Oratoria 12, remember to leave a little bit of a gap in your comments. If you are leaving a comment down below, remember to leave a little bit of a gap down below so that there's common courtesy going around the channel, so that people don't get unnecessarily spoiled if they're going down in the comment section or anything of that sort. It would be truly appreciated, and it would be very kind of you to do so, guys. All right. Now, before I get in as well, I should also mention one more thing before I get into making this video, is that as I've read through both the game adaptation and the light novel of Sword Oratoria 12, I would like to also point out immediately before we get any further into the video that part 1 of Sword Oratoria 12 in Danmemo covers about 2/3 of the light novel. Basically, it goes up to about chapter 6. It completes chapter 6, and it's on page like 168, 166 basically of the English light novel, that is, of course. So bear that in mind. It is covering quite a big chunk of the story, to be quite honest, and I'm very curious to see what they're gonna do in part 2 and part 3. I'll talk about that later on in the video as well, but it is going to be very interesting to see what they do in the future for the upcoming parts and see what they change and add, of course, because we do know Mori sensei did mention before the start of the anniversary that this Sword Oratoria 12 adaptation in Danmemo was going to have some interesting additions and changes, of course. So let's get into it. I think without further ado, we should talk about the changes that they put in Danmemo's version of Sword Oratoria 12. Now, I think the big one I'm going to talk about, and the big change I think it has been, it's basically one big scene that they changed, and I think it's not really a change, it's more so an addition, actually. Not even change, it's an addition. Is if you go all the way down to about here, yeah, if you go down to about 1 hour and 19 minutes, we come to this big scene, this big exposition, basically before Lefia's stats get updated in the light novel, and of course in game we get to the scene where basically all the Loki familiar members have gotten new outfits. And the reason behind that is because, of course, if you guys didn't know, in the game adaptation of Danmemo, they kind of revived Line. After the events of volume 8, they basically said, well, she's alive now. So yeah, basically Danmemo's adaptations for Sword Oratoria feature Line being alive, basically. So that's the big change, I would say, between the light novel versus the game adaptation. Is one, Line is alive, and then these battle uniform scenes are completely brand new. This is something that hasn't been put into the light novels, and this is completely fresh and original for Danmemo. So I would say that this is the big difference between the two, in my personal opinion. I don't think I noticed anything that drastically different between the two adaptations. Otherwise, it was primarily this. Where Line was basically a sort of like character that was there for vibes, to be honest. The thing is, right, Line doesn't really influence the story that much outside of this battle uniform scene. She's just there for vibes, really. I'm not gonna lie. She's literally just there for vibes, to be quite honest. And then all of a sudden she becomes a curse expert for this scene, basically, because effectively what they've done is the battle uniform that they've prepped is basically supposed to be a sort of like curse absorbent. Effectively, the uniforms that they've got is basically supposed to be some sort of like curse absorbent, basically. And she's been working with like Ahmed and so many other people to get things rolling for that uniform. So yeah, that would be the main difference between Danmemo's SO12 and of course the light novel version of SO12. There's realistically no other major difference between the two. Now, the other differences that I noticed is if we go over to this section and this second episode I have, of course, the next hour of the story that I posted on the channel, which, by the way, if you want to see my reactions to the story, I've put them into 3 separate videos, or you can watch it all in one go in the live stream that I have up on the channel. Of course, it's a way for you guys to also read the story and listen to the story as well while you're, if you want to read the story anyways, and if you want to do it with me in the background as well, adding some form of commentary, you guys can do so. Of course, you guys can do so. But one thing I noticed that was a big addition, and this wasn't just one scene, this was kind of placed everywhere, sort of like it was placed everywhere in bits and bobs, basically, in certain positions, not in every place, basically, because they start talking about stuff like the Great Feud and of course Azard and Althea. This is something that wasn't in the light novel, because the time Sword Oratoria 12 came out, it was 2019. It was 2019 when it released in Japan for the first time, and this was a year before the events of Astrea Record were told for the first time in Danmemo. Danmemo's 3rd anniversary is where we found out about Astrea Record, and that was in 2020. This novel came out in 2019. So basically what Amori sensei did, I guess, in this situation was basically add bits and bobs of the Astrea Record, which makes sense because the events, well, you could argue that the events are of a similar threat level, I would say, right? Obviously the destruction of Orario, I would say you could argue that this was a little bit more drastic because, of course, this was not just affecting Orario, but the entire world of Danmemo, basically, right? Of course, with the opening of the Great Hole and everything, right? It was basically opening the gates of hell, like Dionysus said later on in the story, right? So of course, the Great Feud and, the events of Astrea Record were referred to many a times. Even Artie was referred to in this specific scene, of course, right? Like here, I can't go on to meet Artie just yet. Like, it was insane to see some of the references that I was seeing as well. I was kind of surprised about that. I wasn't expecting it, to be quite honest, but it makes sense for them to have included it because, well, Astrea Record is a canon event now. It was a canon event when it first dropped. It's a canon event now, especially that, we have the light novel publications for Astrea Record. So it made sense for them to add it in Danmemo as well. And I wonder if they're probably going to retroactively start adding it in maybe the main series and other Sword Oratoria light novels as well, maybe. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see on that front. Because now that it's in light novel format, I wouldn't be surprised if they start adding it in future light novels, maybe references to it or something. I have to assume that, right? It has to happen. By the way, this is one thing I will talk about in more detail, but this speech was chef's kiss. This speech by Finn was chef's kiss, honestly. It was so well done. It was so well done. One of the things about Finn's speech that I want to also point out, and this is something that, well, of course, it wasn't in the light novels because we don't have pictures or that many illustrations, I should say, in the light novel. But of course, it was something that was a big selling point for me in terms of the light novel, to be quite honest. I absolutely adored it. I wasn't expecting it, to be quite honest. I just offhandedly said during the stream that I would love to see if they did it because it would be amazing. It would be honestly amazing if they did, because it would just be, it would just be so in tune with exactly what Finn was talking about, and of course what we have seen in those stories. And of course what I mean is, of course, Finn was talking about, how there will be no hero after these events, but he was also referring to the heroes of the past at the same time, whose names have been written in scripts, in books, and so on and so forth. And I wasn't expecting, this to pop up, but he basically says, like the heroes of the past who protected humanity and struggled against destruction that threatened the world. And then we got like slideshows of like Argonaut out of nowhere, and then we got also like we got Argonaut, we got the Knights of Fianna, and then we got, of course, the Great Feud, Zord and Althea. And I was like, I started applauding. I started applauding mid-stream, basically. If I let it play, I stood up, gave a standing ovation as well. It was brilliant. I think that was a nice touch as well. Of course, this is something that we wouldn't have been able to imagine necessarily in the light novel, because we would have just read it as a speech in itself. And of course, at the time, we only had Argonaut, right, in 2019. I think Sword Oratoria 12 and Argonaut released at the same-ish time, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I need to double check that later after this video, or you guys can let me know when Sword Oratoria 12 came out in Japan. But I think it was around the same time, basically, where Sword Oratoria 12 came out, and I think we were just about to get an Argonaut in Danmemo as well. So it was around the same time, basically, and at that time, we wouldn't have really necessarily thought about it. But, in retrospect, it makes sense now, who Finn is referring to, all the old heroes and stuff like that. And we get to see him referring to these old heroes in, of course, visual format as well. And, as somebody who loves the Argonaut story and the Knights of Fianna stuff, I think that was a nice addition. That was a very, very nice addition. Honestly, outside of that, I'll be very real and say this. Those were the only big changes. There were a couple of additional like one-liners, two-liners, but none of them felt significant. Like, they weren't like significant changes. If anything, a lot of the monologues actually turned into like actual dialogue, funnily enough, right? That was one thing I noticed throughout this game adaptation, was that a lot of the dialogues that were monologues in the light novels were actually converted into proper dialogue, like actually vocalized dialogue, which was very interesting to me. It made sense in some situations, and of course they didn't make every monologue or internal monologue a actual dialogue or an actual piece of dialogue, which was great, because I think they chose the right sets of dialogue to become voiced, right? I think that was one thing that I think they handled extremely well. And there were very significant moments as well. I think if I go back here, one thing I want to also point out is if I go over to maybe around here, I think Loki, yes, okay, this is a very significant point, right? Is when Loki comes into Lafia's bedroom, right? And Lafia and Elfie's bedroom, and she has the chat about, questioning Lafia about, and, telling Lafia about who Ain could be, who Enyo could be, and everything. And I love that there was like this moment in the game where Lafia is just banging and throwing things and screaming for a little bit, because it signifies that Loki told Lafia something specifically. And obviously we realize in part 3 of my recording, or towards the end of part 1, exactly what that means. So these additions and changes, I think, were very nice and well done. In all honesty, hats off to the Danmemo development team as well as Omori. I think the changes that they made were excellent, and additions that they made were brilliant as well. I mean, there weren't changes, actually. I shouldn't even say that there were changes, because honestly, the dialogue itself is also pretty one-to-one. Once I finished reading the story, right, I scrubbed through my live stream as well as a couple of my recordings that I did in between the live stream, right? And I had the book open as well at the same time, and I was comparing the dialogue, and honestly, there were no differences in the dialogue. In fact, I would say the only thing that they did, like I said, was they added to the dialogue in certain cases, basically with like a line or two, and it was well done. I genuinely loved it. I really did love it. I guess the only, like I said, the only big difference I would probably point out, and the big addition slash adjustment, is of course the battle uniforms of the Loki familiar members, and of course Line being alive and this entire scene happening. That's the only big change slash addition that I would point out in part 1. Now, like I said, they've covered 170 pages already of Sword Oratoria 12, and there's about 130 or 140 pages to go, basically, hereafter. And there's 2 more parts of this anniversary to go. Both parts will have story tales as well. There's going to be a lot more added, I think, in part 2 and part 3. I think part 1 was the one where there were barely any changes. I want to actually go to part 3 actually for a split second, because I want to show you guys another thing. Yeah, I want to go here actually really quickly and show you guys another big change that happened at the end of the novel. I say a big change, it's another change, I would say, that's on the same level as the battle uniform thing. But basically, I think for the most part, right, I expect to see more changes in part 2 and part 3, or additions, I should say. I don't think there's going to be any, I think I was a bit surprised at the lack thereof in part 1. I thought part 1 would have actually had a lot of the additions and stuff like that. But they powered through a lot of the part 1 storyline, and of course, the story of Sword Oratoria 12, to get where they are right now. I expect to see a lot more additions in part 2 and part 3 as a result of that. But yes, I think the big change that was noticed, I would say, is at the end, of course, when we obviously see at the end of chapter 6 in the light novel, and of course at the end of part 1 in Danmemo, is obviously the Hestia Familia getting ready to jump into the fray as well, alongside obviously the Freya Familia as well, and the rest of the reinforcements, right? And of course the big change here is Bell. I mean, Bell's uniform, of course, he's also been given a battle uniform. Now, obviously, I think the main reason why they've given everybody a battle uniform is, of course, to sell units in Danmemo. But at the same time, you know, it makes sense that they should have been given battle uniforms. In fact, I think everybody should have had a new battle uniform, especially the Hestia Familia. I don't know why they're all just wearing normal uniforms, and then Bell gets pretty much a new armor piece. Of course, they explain a little bit why here, of course, right? Lord Hermes sent such an expensive piece of equipment to support Master Bell's arm, which you can see is this, it's this wrapping basically, but I assume there's a lot more going on there in his left arm with the red wrapping. Of course, you know, this takes place after the events of season 4, right? So it makes sense as to why his arm is wrapped up, because it's still healing, right? But you also see he's been given the sword and everything, which is obviously going to be actually, now this is spoilers for what's going to be coming up in part 2 and the rest of SO12. In the next part, I remember, if I'm not mistaken, in Sword Oratoria 12, Bell actually asks for a sword during the fight itself when they get there. So I expect that scene to be probably removed, I would say, because he's already gotten a sword here, clearly, right? You can see he has a whole new sword here. So I expect that to be adjusted as well, I would say. I think they're going to adjust that, and they're going to probably change that significantly as well, because obviously here he now has a sword without even, without even having to ask for one. So that's probably going to be another change I can already tell you guys will happen going into part 2. But yeah, let me know what you guys think. This was going to be a very short video because honestly the changes weren't that drastic. I expect part 2 and part 3 to be like 30-minute long videos dissecting every change, because, or addition I should say, because I think there's gonna be a lot more stuff in there. But yeah, let me know what you guys think down below in the comment section. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Please be sure to leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys in the next one. Take it easy, everybody. Bye bye.